Well, it's Friday and Sunday is right around the corner. And on Fridays, we've been looking at the book of Hebrews. And recently, we've been looking through the 11th chapter in Hebrews chapter 11, where the Hebrews writer gives so many examples of faith and obedience, faithfulness, endurance, victory, suffering. We talked about last time having that faith, even if it had a if they had a good ending or if they suffered a great deal. And so the Hebrews writer is trying to encourage his readers, his fellow brethren, our fellow brethren, these Christians who are struggling in their faith, and he's trying to tell them, look at all of these examples we have of what it is to live by faith and to be faithful to God no matter what. And now that he's done that, this really, chapter 11 could even be extended into chapter 12, because really the first few verses of chapter 12 go very well with chapter 11. His thought continues. He didn't divide it up into these chapters, which is why after giving all of these examples in chapter 12, verse 1, he says to them, "Therefore we also." So we've looked at all of these examples, all these men and women of faith. Now we also, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. That is, he says, we have so many examples laid out before us, those who have gone before us, who by faith proved that it is possible to be faithful to God no matter what they face in this life, no matter what they're up against. And since we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, this audience all about us, as if we were in a stadium and they're all in the stands watching and waiting to see what we're going to do, we are surrounded by all the men and women of faith who are now, in a sense, looking at us, watching us, waiting to see if we too are going to be men and women of faith. And so the Hebrews writer says, thinking about that, thinking about how we have so many examples of faith and witnesses who have gone before us and are now it's our turn. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. That's the first thing we got to do. We've got to get rid of those things in this life of this world that are sinful, that weigh us down, that distract us, that hinder us from living a faithful life for God. And we're going to know what that is in our life. And if we don't know, we need to spend time in God's Word and with God's people and prayerfully figure it out to get rid of these weights, these cares, these pleasures of sin, these things that are hindering us, holding us down, causing us to fail, causing us to not run the race that is set before us. He says, let us lay aside, get rid of, put down, put away every weight and sin that so easily ensnares us. So easily ensnares us. And if we do not purposefully, intentionally fight and rid ourselves of these sinful things and the things that tempt us, we're more easily going to give in to them. So we've got to put them away. We've got to lay them down. We've got to get rid of them. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Run with what? He says, endurance. That perseverance. That endurance that is going to take us faithfully to the finish line, no matter how hard the race, no matter how hard the path before us is. We've got to get rid of the weight. We've got to get rid of the things that ensnare us, and we've got to run with endurance the race that is set before us. And then in verse 2, he gives us the greatest example of faith and faithfulness, the most important example of all. Now, all of these examples he has given so far are very special and important and good, but the greatest of all, verse 2 is, he says, we need to look to Jesus. Looking to Jesus, the author, or that is the originator and perfecter of our faith, the author and finisher of our faith. Our faith is all about Jesus, in Jesus. It starts with Jesus. It ends with Jesus. It is all about Jesus. We've got to look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, look at his example. Jesus endured the cross. We look back, the Hebrews writer takes us back to his death and all that he went through and the suffering and the shame. But he says that Jesus endured the cross. Of all things, he endured the suffering of the cross, despising the shame. Didn't care about the shame. Didn't care what people were saying about him. Didn't care how they were treating him. In a sense of, he wasn't going to let that stop him. And how did he do that is the big question here. Well, he tells us, Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him. How did Jesus endure the pain and suffering of a horrible death on the cross and all of the shame and mocking and blasphemies that were made against him? It was because Jesus was looking past that, above that, beyond that. The joy that was set before him. Jesus knew what was on the other side of the suffering and death of the cross. Jesus knew the joy that was coming. Jesus knew the resurrection that he was going to experience. Jesus knew the salvation he would be bringing us. Jesus knew he would be going back to the Father in heaven. Jesus remained faithful. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despised the shame, and now he has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus was faithful and obedient. Jesus could have stopped at any moment. Jesus could have turned away. Jesus could have said at any time, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I really am not looking forward to the cross. I really don't want the pain and suffering. I really don't want people treating me this way. And at any minute, Jesus could have quit. As a matter of fact, probably the closest he came to it in the Garden of Gethsemane when he prayed 3 times to the Father, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, let your will be done. Jesus didn't give up. Jesus didn't give in. If Jesus had given up, we would not be saved. But Jesus didn't give up. He didn't give in. He didn't quit. Jesus endured the cross, despised the shame, because his heart and mind were focused on the joy that was coming. The Hebrews writer is trying to tell these brethren, you have got to look to Jesus and for the joy that is coming. That is how you're going to be able to endure and persevere through these challenges you're facing. And then he even goes on to tell them more. Verse 3, for consider Jesus who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Again, he already gave us examples in chapter 11. Look what these people went through. And they didn't quit. But look at Jesus who endured such hostility from sinful man against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. The Hebrews writer is saying, I can't say, woe is me, I'm having all these, sufferings and challenges. This isn't fair, so I'm just going to quit. I'm going to give up. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus endured such hostility from bad. Who am I to say that my suffering is worse than Jesus's? I highly doubt many, if not any of us, have endured such suffering as Jesus did. So who am I to complain and grow weary and quit and give up just because it's hard? And then finally, he even tells them, verse 4, you have not yet resisted the bloodshed, striving against sin. Jesus was beaten, slapped, spit on. Jesus was scourged. Jesus was nailed to the cross. Jesus shed his blood. Now, the Hebrews writer, isn't saying that, people weren't dying for Christ, because they were, and they had. But he's telling these brethren particularly, listen, you've not even got to the point where you're shedding blood or being killed. Jesus endured bloodshed and killing. And you're not even to that point yet. So how are you going to quit now? Don't quit ever. Look at all of these examples in chapter 11, and especially those examples, and all of these examples, and the challenges they face, the sufferings they face, but they faithfully endured to the end. Jesus, above all, faithfully endured to the end. And that's what we need to do today. So let's remember that, lest we become today weary and discouraged, and maybe we're tempted to quit or give in to sin or give in to the ways of thinking of the world. Let's hang in there, hold fast, endure, persevere, run the race with endurance. Don't give up, don't quit. Get rid of the things that weigh us down, the sinful things. Let's run with endurance the race set before us. Run it all the way to the finish line. We'll get to rest when we get to heaven to be with God. But until then, keep running, keep fighting, keep going. Don't quit. Look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Follow his example. Look towards the joy that is coming. And when we remember Jesus, especially on Sunday in the Lord's Supper, let's remember how he endured such a horrible suffering and death. And then let that motivate us, not only on Sunday, but every day, today, to live for Jesus. God bless.